The letter came in late October, riding in the saddlebag of a drunk male runner who stank of horses and rot-gut whiskey. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and took it gently, eyeing the cracked wax seal and the careful script on the front. Miss Clara Dobbs, care of Reverend Alcott, Cresswell Township, Nebraska Territory. She read it under the hearth light, lips moving soundlessly, heart ticking faster with every line. A rancher out west, Samuel Rusk, offering marriage. He'd seen her name in a marriage broker listing posted in St. Louis by Reverend Alcott's wife the year prior, when Clara turned 20 and prospects thinned to nothing. Her family was gone but for her younger sister Bate, and Bate was only 15 then. Clara had scrubbed floors and nursed typhoid-stricken orphans, burying more than she saved, but she was still standing. And now here was this letter, written in the clipped but polished tone of a man who owned land, horses, perhaps even his own well. He spoke of God, duty, the importance of steady women, and the hope for children in the coming years. He enclosed money for train fare. Said he would meet her at the Aberdeen station in Dakota Territory, white hat, black coat, with a bouquet of yellow asters in his hand. Clara read it twice more. Then she tucked it under her mattress and said nothing. The next morning she went out before sunup, walked the hill behind the church, and stared into the barren horizon. The wind stripped her shawl back off her shoulders. Below, Bate was feeding chickens and humming some tune about a girl with gold in her hair. Bate was taller than her now. Her eyes were green as pine tips, her laugh easy. Clara looked down at her dirt-bitten fingernails and remembered the feel of coffin wood. It was her burden to leave. It had always been hers. She told Bate over supper, and Bate looked up sharply, bread halfway to her mouth. "You'll marry a stranger." "I'll marry a future," Clara said, voice calm as water. "It's a hard land, but it's a real offer. Not much else comes our way." Bate said nothing, but she didn't smile either. The day Clara boarded the train, the whole township came to see, not because she was well-liked, she wasn't, but because any kind of wedding, even a distant one, drew eyes. Bate handed her a rolled quilt with a piece of her mother's embroidery stitched into the seam. Clara nodded, kissed her sister on the temple, and climbed aboard with the ticket and the ring in her pocket. It was a plain silver band, too large for her fingers. The journey took 3 days. Planes rolled endless and dead outside the windows. Clara read her Bible, ate little, spoke less. At night she thought of the words in the letter, how stiff they felt, how little they said of love, but love was a city luxury. On the prairie, men wanted hands that didn't tremble and backs that didn't break. She would be enough. When the train wheezed into Aberdeen, it was dusk. A dust storm had passed through earlier, coating everything in pale grit. She stepped onto the platform and looked around. He was there. She saw him before he saw her. The bouquet drooped in his hand like a sick child. He wore the hat, the coat, but what caught Clara first was the shine of his scalp beneath the low-brimmed white. He was balding hard, temples eaten by time, 40, perhaps more, broad-shouldered with hands like hammers. His eyes were a cold river blue. He spotted her, smiled without showing teeth, and tipped the hat. "Miss Dobbs." Clara's voice faltered. "Yes." She let him carry her bag. She let him talk about the ride to his homestead, 2 days west by wagon, rough road, no stopping. She nodded when he mentioned a house, 2 dogs, 3 hired boys for fence work, but her fingers curled around the ring in her pocket, cold and heavy. That night at the boarding house, she did not sleep. She watched the moon rise over the edge of the plains and thought of Bate feeding chickens, humming. The next morning, she packed her things before he knocked. "I can't," she said, meeting him at the door. His mouth drew tight. "What?" "I'm not the one for you. I won't waste your time." "You took the fare." "I'll return it." "I waited 6 months." She didn't answer. He stared at her, jaw clenching. Then he turned and walked away without another word, boots loud on the steps. Clara wrote Bate the same day, told her she was coming home, told her everything. Bate never wrote back. 3 weeks later, the reply came not by post but in person. Bate Dobbs stepped off the next train in Aberdeen, smiling wide, yellow asters in her hand. Samuel Rusk met her at the station, and this time he smiled with his teeth. The land spread dry and cracked beneath the wagon wheels. Wind whispered through brittle stalks of Indian grass, and clouds loomed in tall silences overhead. Bate sat beside Samuel Rusk, hands folded neatly in her lap, ring snug on her finger. Her dress was blue and dusted brown at the hem. The asters had long since withered in the heat. She asked little, listened much. Samuel spoke in fragments of fencing lost to coyotes, a colt with a twisted leg, the cost of salt pork in town. His voice was low, graveled, used to silence. He watched her sideways as if she might vanish if he blinked. She didn't. They arrived at dusk on the second day. The ranch was a house and 2 sheds ringed by split-rail fences and stubborn prairie. Chickens pecked at packed dirt. 2 dogs lifted their heads but didn't bark. A windmill creaked. Samuel helped her down and led her inside. The house smelled of cedar, tobacco, old iron. One room held a stove and table, another held a narrow bed. There was no third. He said, "We'll marry by the end of the week." Bate nodded. He said, "There's work. I won't ask for more than you give." Bate nodded again, but her eyes were already sweeping the corners. The cracked window pane, the faded photograph of a woman in a high collar tucked behind a rusted horseshoe. Later, when she unpacked, she placed a folded letter beneath the bed frame. It bore her sister's handwriting. She did not read it again. She simply pressed it flat against the wood, like a wound she didn't want to reopen. The wedding was quiet, just the preacher from Dry Needle Ridge and Samuel's hired hands as witnesses. One brought a bottle, and another carved a chicken for supper. Bate wore her mother's locket and a ribbon in her hair. Samuel wore the same black coat from Aberdeen. His scalp gleamed beneath the brim. When the preacher asked if she'd take this man, Bate said yes without a tremor. She had been saying yes since the day Clara left. They shared a bed that night. Samuel's touch was neither cruel nor kind. It was practiced, careful, done in silence. When it was over, he turned away and slept with one arm beneath his pillow. Bate lay awake, eyes wide, listening to the tick of the windmill outside. In the morning, she washed herself in cold water, tied her hair back, and went to feed the chickens. Weeks passed, then months. Bate learned the patterns of the land, the way the dogs whined when storm air thickened, the sound of hoofbeats long before riders crested the rise. She learned to patch fence wire, stitch leather, boil lye soap. Samuel noticed. He said little, but when he came back from town with a bolt of calico or a new brush for the mule, he set it on the table without explanation. Bate thanked him, and they went on. She asked once about the photograph on the mantel. He said, "My sister died in childbirth, the child too." Bate nodded and did not ask again. The silence between them grew roots. It wasn't cold, just thick. She sometimes imagined her voice would echo if she raised it. Still, something in her was settling too. There was a quiet pride in keeping a home that didn't rot, in learning the land's moods. She woke before light, worked until dark, slept with bones sore but her breath steady. No one had ever looked to her before. Now she held the weight of a household, and it did not crush her. One afternoon, while cleaning the shed, she found a box. It was nailed shut but light. Inside, letters, dozens, tied in red ribbon, brittle with age. She opened one. The script was Clara's. The words weren't addressed to her but to someone unnamed. A child not yet born, hopes and fears written in slanting ink, a life imagined, a name, Eva, written again and again. Bate sat in the dirt and read every one. When Samuel came looking for her, she had the last letter in her lap. He said, "What are you doing in here?" She looked up. "Why didn't you burn them?" He stared for a long moment, then said, "Didn't have the heart." She watched his face. "You never wanted me." I didn't say that. You wanted her. I waited, his voice was flat. She said no, you came instead, I didn't make you. Bate rose slowly. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, with something colder. I wasn't a choice, she said. I was a replacement. Samuel didn't reply. He turned and walked back to the house. That night they did not share the bed. Winter came sharp and early. The hired boys rode south. The snow cracked like glass beneath the weight of boots. Bate kept the fire going, boiled beans, chopped wood with blistered palms. She said little. Samuel said less. But she noticed he watched her, not with desire, with a question. One evening, while mending his coat, she asked, "Do you still write to her?" He looked at her long, then said, "No." "Why not? What would I say?" Bate bent her head. "Tell her what you took." He said nothing. That night after the fire burned low, Bate went outside and stood in the yard, snow soaking through her boots. The wind howled. She didn't move, not until dawn pinked the sky and her feet went numb. She went inside, and she began to write. Not to Clara, but to herself, to the girl she had been, to Eva. The letter never left the ranch. Bate folded it into a tight square and tucked it behind a loose board in the floor beneath the bed. She begun a habit of writing before dawn, when the house was still and Samuel snored softly, back turned, hand beneath the pillow. She wrote without mercy, of the silence, of the way he stared at her back when she bent to light the stove, of the dreams that woke her screaming babies with no faces, a wedding veil soaked in blood. She wrote of Clara too, not in anger, but as if sketching a ghost that lived in the walls. She wondered if her sister had felt what she now did, this dull, cold ache behind the ribs, like the body mourning something it never held. By February, the north barn collapsed under snow. Samuel cursed, dug out the beams himself, and refused her help. That night his hands bled and his knuckles were split, but he wouldn't let her tend them. He drank rye from a chipped tin cup and stared into the fire as if it might speak. She said, "I can do more than cook." He said, "I didn't marry you for that." Her breath stilled. Then why? He didn't answer. Late in March, a rider came. Dust-covered, dark-bearded, slumped forward like his horse carried his bones rather than his weight. Bate watched from the porch as Samuel greeted him with a handshake, then led him into the house. "Old friend," Samuel said. "Name, Henry Roach. Fought with me down near Wichita. He'll be staying a while." Roach was polite enough, called her Mrs. Rusk, smiled wide but never with his eyes. They were pale and restless. The dogs didn't like him. He told stories by the fire of outlaw raids, of towns burned to soot, of women dragged screaming from rail cars. He laughed too loud, drank too much, and watched Bate too long. Samuel said nothing. She kept her face blank, listened, learned. It was Roach who found the letter behind the floorboard. He was drunk, crawling beneath the bed after a dropped match, and came up holding it like a coin pulled from the belly of a fish. "What's this?" he slurred, waving it. Bate snatched it before Samuel saw. Her hand moved quick, but her voice stayed calm. "Nothing, just notes, chores." Roach squinted. "No chores I ever saw start with Dear Eva." Bate smiled. "You can't read." Roach grinned, but his eyes narrowed. "Fair enough." He tossed the paper into the fire. It caught and curled black in seconds. Bate didn't flinch. Samuel didn't speak. Later, when the house was still, she opened the loose board again and found the rest. Roach hadn't seen the others. She burned them herself, slowly, one by one. Then she stopped writing. That spring, the river thawed and flooded part of the lower field. Samuel lost 2 calves to the mud. He paced for hours afterward, circling the pen, boots sinking in the soft earth. Bate found him that evening with his sleeves rolled and shovel in hand, digging a new ditch line by lantern light. She stood beside him without speaking. When he collapsed against the fence post, she brought him a pail of water. He drank, wiped his mouth with his wrist, and said, "You don't ask for much." Bates said, "I learned not to." He looked at her then, really looked, as if realizing she hadn't left. "I don't hate you," he said suddenly, "even if you think I should." Bates' mouth opened, but no words came. He said, "I didn't ask for the wrong sister. I asked for the one who answered." She stared at him, not in forgiveness, in reckoning. "You still sleep with her name in your mouth," she said. He flinched. "I don't speak her name." "No," Bates said, "but you breathe it." Roach left in May, muttering something about Montana silver and a woman waiting in Bozeman. Samuel didn't ask him to stay. After the dust of his horse faded, Bate cleaned the linens he'd used and buried the ash from the fire pit where he'd spat and pissed like a mongrel. She walked out into the prairie that evening, far beyond the property line, until the house was a thumbnail against the sky. The wind pulled her braid loose. Thunder murmured somewhere distant. She looked west and thought of Clara. She didn't miss her, not exactly. What she missed was the moment before the train came, when both of them stood side by side at the depot and could have made 1,000 choices. Bate had made hers. Clara had made hers. But choice didn't keep you warm in bed, and it didn't stop the ache in your bones when the land refused to give. Bate had something now. It was not joy, it was not peace, but it was hers. She turned and walked back home. By June, the hens stopped laying. Coyotes took 3. Bate stayed up with a rifle, waiting by the coop, and shot one clean through the throat. When she dragged its body to the ditch, Samuel said, "You're harder than I thought." She said, "You thought wrong." He looked like he might speak, then didn't. They shared the bed that night. No words, just warmth. In the morning, Bate woke first. She stared at the ceiling and felt the shift inside her. Subtle, solid. She was not Eva. She was not Clara. She was Mrs. Rusk. The summer came in dry and mean. Grass withered early. The creek narrowed to a trickle. Flies thickened in the barn, and the horses swatted their tails raw. Bate worked barefoot most days, skirts hitched up, her calves brown from sun and dirt. Her hands were rope-burned and steady. She could lift a saddle alone now, shoot a rabbit clean through the eye, carry 2 buckets from the well without spilling a drop. She stopped thinking about what Clara would have said, stopped wondering how it might have been. That belonged to a different Bate, a softer one. That girl had died sometime between Roach and the coyotes, and no one had wept for her. Samuel watched her different now, not with hunger, not with guilt, something closer to fear. He never raised his voice, never laid a hand, but he grew quieter with each month, as if trying not to disturb something coiled inside the house. He spent more time on the range, fixing posts that weren't broken, walking the fence line like a penitent man. One evening she found him in the barn, face cut and bleeding from a nail. He hadn't tended it. "You'll rot," she said, washing the wound clean with whiskey. He didn't wince. "Maybe that's what I'm owed." Bate paused, then tied the bandage tight. "It's not me you owe." He looked up. "Then who?" She didn't answer. She didn't know. Maybe no one. Maybe the land itself, swallowing lives and names and prayers with the same indifference. In August, a woman came. She rode in on a gray mare, face veiled against dust. She wore a wide hat, boots scuffed to hell, and her eyes were rimmed dark like she hadn't slept in weeks. Bates saw her coming down the trail and knew that's not a traveler. That's someone looking for something buried. The woman said her name was Agnes March, claimed she was looking for work, new horses, new kitchens, said she'd come from Missouri by way of dead husbands and bad winters. Bate didn't believe half of it, but something in the way the woman held her shoulders, rigid, sharp, like she was ready to strike, felt familiar. Samuel came out and stared hard at her. "You a widow?" he asked. "Twice," she said, "but they earned it." He smirked. "You cook. Better than I pray." They gave her the cot in the smokehouse. She didn't complain. That night, Bate watched her carve meat with a hand that didn't tremble and thought, "This woman has buried things she won't speak of." Agnes settled in quick, too quick. She knew how to read men, when to speak and when to fade. But she didn't fade around Bate. When they sat by the fire at night, she'd glance over, eyes sharp, and ask things others wouldn't. "You love him," she said once, out of nowhere. Bate stirred the beans. "Don't need to." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Agnes grinned, showing a chipped tooth. "He don't love you either, not like a man loves a woman. He looks at you like penance." Bate didn't flinch. "I know." They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The truth had been laid bare between them, and it didn't change the meal or the chores. But after that, Bate started hiding things, her letters, her sewing shears, the deed papers Samuel kept locked in the desk drawer. Agnes didn't pry, not openly, but Bate knew a snake when it coiled near her feet. One morning, Samuel left early to ride north for cattle. Bate woke to find the house too quiet. Agnes wasn't in the yard. The dogs were uneasy. She checked the smokehouse, empty. Then she saw the loose board beneath the bed. The letters were gone. Bate didn't breathe, didn't scream. She saddled the mule and rode to the edge of the property, found tracks leading toward town. She caught up by sundown outside a trading post. Agnes sat on the porch, smoking, papers spread in her lap. Bate dismounted and said nothing. Agnes looked up, eyes calm. "You wrote pretty, for a woman sleepin' beside a man she don't love." Bate said, "Those weren't for you." "They're mine now," Agnes said. "You burned some, I saved the rest. Maybe I'll sell M. Maybe I'll send M where they belong." Bate stepped forward. "You don't know who they're for." Agnes smiled. "Don't matter. What matters is you wrote M. And there's power in a woman who puts truth to paper, makes her dangerous." Bate's voice was stone. "Give them back." Agnes rose slowly. "Or what?" Bate didn't answer. She lunged. They hit the porch boards hard. Wood cracked beneath them. Bate struck first, open palm to the ear. Agnes bit her shoulder. They rolled, grunted, tore fabric and skin. A man stepped outside, started to shout, then stopped when he saw their eyes. Bate pinned her, hands around her wrists, blood on her mouth. "I won't ask again." Agnes stared up at her, then slowly smiled. "There you are." Bate stood, took the letters, turned and walked. She rode home without stopping. Samuel returned 3 days later, asked no questions. Just looked at the bruises on her arm and the scratches down her throat. "She's gone," he asked. "She found what she needed," Bate said. That night they sat by the fire, both silent. Then Samuel said, "I won't have sons." Bate looked at him. "No. You'd have been a good mother." Bate didn't nod, didn't thank him. She only whispered, "I'm already one." He didn't ask what she meant. And she didn't tell him. The wind turned colder before the trees did. August waned into a brittle September, and the skies above the Rusk Ranch seemed to stretch further, emptier, bluer than any season before. The birds left early that year. Even the dogs grew quiet. Bate walked the fields each morning alone. No Agnes, no hired hands, no Clara. Only the soft hush of her boots through dust and the memory of blood beneath her nails. There was no more writing, no more letters. Whatever had once needed to be said now lived under her tongue like a secret too sharp to spit out. Samuel didn't ride much anymore. He coughed deep at night, a sound like something caught in his chest. Some days he stayed in bed till noon, staring out the window like a man watching the sea from a ship he never wanted to board. Bait boiled roots and pine syrup. She spooned broth into him and bathed his face when he sweated through the linens. He never asked for help, but he didn't push her away either. One night, his voice came through the dark like a crack in the world. She said no because I didn't love her. Bait turned in the cot across the room. She saw it in my face, he said, even if I didn't. Bait listened, silent, waiting. I wanted a wife who'd stay, he rasped. You stayed. She rose, crossed to him, sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't stay for you. I know. Bait touched his shoulder, not kindly, not cruelly, just enough to say she heard him. In the last frost of October, Samuel Rusk died. No final words, no wringing hands. He slipped quiet in the hour before dawn. Bait found him still and pale, mouth open, eyes shut like a door that would never be opened again. She didn't cry. She built the fire, fed the dogs, hitched the mule, dug the grave herself with a spade and a stubborn shoulder, buried him west of the house beneath a hawthorn tree, marked it with a stone. When the preacher came from Dry Needle Ridge to say the rites, he asked if there were next of kin to inform. Bait said no. He frowned, no family. She looked toward the hill, toward the past. Not anymore. Word spread slow through the prairie, a widow now, young and hard-eyed, keeping the Rusk place like a fortress. Folks came to call, offer help, ask if she'd sell. Bait said no to everyone. She wore black not out of grief, but to remind herself who she had outlived. The winter bit down early. Snow came and stayed. She killed a buck herself, butchered it with her own knife, hung the meat, tanned the hide, repaired the roof, reinforced the barn doors, taught herself how to mend boots and gut fish and oil a trapline. At night she read by lamplight. Sometimes she stared at the fire until the edges of her vision blurred and the past came creeping, slow and hungry. She let it sit beside her. She didn't speak to it. The letter came in spring. It bore no return name, just a St. Louis postmark, the handwriting sharp, elegant, unmistakable. Dear Bait, I heard of his passing. Someone sent word to the Reverend. I wasn't sure if I should write. I wasn't sure if I had the right. I don't ask forgiveness. I don't even ask for understanding. But I need you to know I never regretted stepping away at that station, not for what it cost me, only for what it cost you. You were always stronger than me. I think I knew that even then. If you want me, I'm in Kansas City now. Nursing, boarding house near the stockyards. I don't expect anything, just I thought you should know where to find me. Clara. Bait held the letter for a long time, then she folded it once, slid it into the hearth, watched it catch, curl, vanish. Some ghosts you invited back, some you buried deeper. In the 3rd year of her widowhood, they started calling her the Hawthorne Widow. Said she was half witch, half mule, could mend a broken leg or break a man, will, depending how he spoke to her. She didn't mind. In town, men lowered their voices when she passed. Women watched her with something between envy and fear. She rode with a rifle across her lap and a braid down her back like a black rope tied to nothing. One night, a young girl knocked on her door, barely 16, bruised under one eye, said she heard the widow might let her stay just until the bruises faded, just until the man stopped looking for her. Bait said there's an extra cot in the smokehouse and chores at sunup. The girl nodded, didn't ask anything more. Bait stood in the doorway long after she went to sleep. The stars above were cold and clean. Coyotes howled far off across the ridge. She whispered the name only once. Eva. Not a child, not a ghost. Not anymore.